Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be breaking down a seriously critical tool for governance and institutional integrity. Specifically, we're looking at a framework developed by Mike Masoud and published by the American Anti-Corruption Institute. All right, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Today, we're exploring the concept of competent questioning. And this is a big one because it elevates oversight from what is often just a procedural formality into a highly disciplined, active mechanism for actually preventing corruption.
Now, we really need to bust a common myth right out of the gate here. The idea that corruption is somehow obvious. The reality is, corruption rarely announces itself. It doesn't exactly walk into a boardroom wearing a name tag, right? Fraud and institutional failure actually survive in plain sight. And it's not always because people are intentionally looking the other way, but simply because the right questions are never asked at the right time.
So, where does this stuff actually hide? Well, it buries itself in the everyday machinery of an organization. We're talking about those routine approvals that just get rubber-stamped. It's entrusted relationships that are never really scrutinized, and those highly pressured moments of manufactured urgency. It absolutely thrives in technical complexity, in delegation, in weak documentation, and, perhaps most dangerously, in an institutional fear of asking uncomfortable questions. You see, the real problem isn't just silence. The problem is low-quality questioning that allows all these everyday vulnerabilities to go completely unchecked.
Here's our quick roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Defining the core concept. 2. Comfort versus accountability. 3. The competence prerequisite. And 4. Practical application.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, defining the core concept, and specifically, defining the capability itself.
So, here is the formal definition. Competent questioning is the disciplined ability to ask clear, relevant, timely, and evidence-seeking questions that expose corruption risks before they mature into misconduct, loss, or institutional failure. And I really want to put a huge spotlight on the word disciplined here. This isn't just casual, everyday curiosity. And it is certainly not a ceremonial inquiry just to create the illusion of oversight. What we're talking about is the highly practical, rigorous application of professional skepticism.
Which brings us to the core proposition of this entire framework. And honestly, it's a powerful one. The quality of anti-corruption oversight cannot exceed the quality of the questions asked. Literally think about the implications of that for a second. A weak question protects a weak system. An uninformed question just allows misconduct to hide behind procedure, behind fancy titles, and behind formal but ultimately empty approvals.
Moving right along to Section 2, comfort versus accountability. This is where we really evaluate oversight in action.
Let's actually compare these two approaches side by side. A weak overseer is just going to ask, was the consultant approved? That question is really just looking for comfort. It wants a simple, easy yes. But a competent overseer, they're asking, wait, who beneficially owns this consultant? How was the fee benchmarked? And was this approval actually free from conflicts? Now that is an authoritative question that demands hard evidence.
Let's apply this to whistleblowing. A board looking for comfort might simply ask, hey, do we have a policy in place? A yes makes everyone in the room feel great. But competent oversight pushes further. How many reports were actually received? Exactly how were they investigated? And what real protection was provided to those reporters? See how that completely shifts the dynamic? You're moving from just verifying that a piece of paper exists to checking its actual, real-world enforcement.
And you see the exact same thing play out in procurement. The weak approach is asking, was the procurement process followed? But a competent inquiry digs way deeper. Were these specifications specifically tailored to favor a certain bidder? Were the competing bids actually genuine? And who influenced the evaluation criteria? Weak questions invite a polite nod of confirmation. Competent questions demand a gritty examination of reality.
Finally, let's look at risk. Did management review the risk assessment? Versus, what specific corruption risks were identified? How were they quantified? And what residual exposure still remains? A competent overseer absolutely refuses to accept assertions at face value without the verifiable data to back it up.
So, the crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly on this point. Shallow questions create false assurance. Competent questions create pressure for truth. Honestly, if you remember just one thing from these comparisons, let it be that. Weak questioning is entirely about finding comfort. Competent questioning is about demanding true, undeniable accountability. Okay, Section 3, the competence prerequisite. Simply put, knowledge is required. Here is the harsh, unavoidable truth about governance. A person simply cannot ask a serious question about a matter they do not understand. If your baseline understanding is shallow, your questions are going to be shallow, and the answers you get back will be equally shallow. Anti-corruption competence isn't just some optional nice-to-have awareness. It is a mandatory governance necessity, and it aligns directly with standards like the International Standard on Auditing 200, which strictly requires professional skepticism.
To actually ask these heavy-hitting questions, authority figures must have specific operational knowledge. They've got to understand the mechanics, like how corruption schemes work and the core principles of internal control. They need to be able to spot the red flags, conflicts of interest, third-party risks, procurement vulnerabilities, and today they even need to understand how automated controls and AI can be exploited. Without this very specific competence, they literally cannot interpret the evidence or effectively challenge the superficial explanations they're given.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, Practical Application. How do we embed this discipline?
So how does this actually translate into a working methodology? Well, step 1 is to trigger oversight with a competent question. But obviously, you don't stop there. Step 2 is you rigorously evaluate the answer and the quality of the evidence provided. And step 3, this is absolutely crucial. If the answer relies on circular reasoning or vague assurances, a competent overseer must treat that vague assurance as a brand new signal of potential risk, not as a neat little resolution to their inquiry.
Now, where does this capability need to live? The short answer is everywhere. Authority is exercised. It has got to be present in board and committee oversight, executive decision-making, internal audit planning, compliance reviews, procurement approvals, third-party due diligence, and regulatory supervision. This mindset is exactly how you test whether an internal control is operating in actual substance rather than just existing on a dusty piece of paper somewhere.
When you do this right, it dramatically lowers risk. An organization starts identifying hidden conflicts of interest way before decisions are finalized. It actively challenges unexplained exceptions to policies. It detects those unusual relationships, exposes weak segregation of duties, and firmly demands hard evidence over empty assurances. Ultimately, this approach strengthens your existing controls and escalates warning signs long before they can turn into a massive institutional disaster.
We have covered a ton of ground today, unpacking exactly how inquiry links to evidence and how evidence ultimately links to accountability. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought regarding your own day-to-day oversight practices. Think about the last time you reviewed a report or approved a contract or sat in a governance meeting. Are your questions creating comfort or are they creating accountability? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep asking the right questions.